Hi, and welcome to Poetry Today. I'm your host, I'm Jennifer Dotson, and I am the founder and program coordinator for Highland Park Poetry. I have two wonderful guests with me today. I'm really pleased to have them, Lois Barr and Charlotte DiGregorio. Both of these guests are here today because they're going to be featured readers at some of Highland Park Poetry's events this fall. Charlotte will be the featured guest at our event on Saturday, September 27th at 8 p.m. at Madame Zuzu's. And Lois is going to be our honored guest at, again, at Madame Zuzu's on October 25th, I believe, is that correct? Yep. At 8 p.m. at Madame Zuzu's, which is located at 582 Roger Williams Avenue. I think we're going to first start with Charlotte. Charlotte is a poet of many forms and an author of a new book, Haiku and Senryu, A Simple Guide for All. She has received 28 poetry awards and was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Her poetry has been translated into 6 languages and is exhibited in many public venues. She hosted her own radio program, Poetry Beat, on public broadcasting. She's also the award-winning author of 4 other nonfiction books, You Can Be a Columnist, Everything You Need to Know About Nursing Homes, Beginner's Guide to Writing and Selling Quality Features, and Your Original Personal Ad. A media guest throughout the U.S., her books are sold in 41 countries. She taught languages and writing at university level for decades and is often a writer in residence at universities and speaks at Nationals Writers Conferences. Charlotte is also the Midwest coordinator of the Haiku Society of America. Wow, that's an impressive list of accomplishments there. Can you talk to me about the genesis of this book in particular? Because it's not many of the guests that we have on Poetry Today are, this is a poetry collection that they're presenting, but yours is more of a writer's guide. Right. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's more of a how-to book. And it instructs people on how to write haiku, which is a very misunderstood form. People know that it originated in Japan centuries ago, but they don't really know what it is. They think it's just some sort of random thought that comes to you and that it's not a poem. But it really has poetic devices. It has alliteration, it's musical, it has rhythm, sometimes there's assonance, the repetition of sounds. So really it is poetry, and that's what people do not understand. And so I wrote this book to kind of give an overview of haiku and senryu is humorous haiku, which has really become a fad because senryu deals with human nature, whereas haiku deals with nature around us. Okay. So these sorts of things need to be explained, and I cover those in the book. And I give it not only an overview, but I give a lot of samples of both haiku and senryu so people get a feel for what those poems really are.
And are there other kinds of guides out there that how is your guide different?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think my guide is very different, and that's why I wrote it. Because the books that are out there, they were written for poets, somebody with a poetry background, whereas my book is so basic that somebody who has never written a poem can catch on to writing poetry, haiku poetry. And so mine is geared towards somebody with no poetic background at all, or it's also helpful for an experienced poet who may want to teach haiku, because I have chapters on how to teach haiku. Okay. And so both beginners and experienced poets can learn from the book.
So your audience really is everyone, as the title.
It's a simple guide for all. So if you're using it as a teaching guide, it will be a simple teaching guide too. So
okay, great.
It kind of covers bases.
And you talked about that you do include samples of the different styles of poems in here. These aren't all by you. These are by other authors. How did you get the different poems that you use in the book?
That's a good question. I know a lot of haiku and senryu poets because I'm Midwest Regional Coordinator of the Haiku Society, and I know haiku poets throughout all the regions of the country in Canada. So I've been reading haiku journals for about, over 20 years, and I always used to check poems that in those journals that I thought were particularly good, that I loved. And so I looked back for about 20 years look back in journals of about 20 years, and I came up with poems that I wanted to include in the book, and I was able to track down the poets.
Oh, wow.
Some of those poets, passed on and are no longer with us, so I had to get permission from family members to reprint them, but it was kind of an ordeal getting all of my permissions.
Okay, so that was probably more challenging than the actual writing of the book.
And more time consuming, I feel, tracking down people over a year's period, trying to, locate people or locate the publishers who would put me in touch with the...
Was there any author that you were particularly excited to have be in the book?
I've gotten... I got some poets who've been poets for decades, and I've run more than one of their haiku in them. And there are even some Illinois poets like John J. Dunphy, who's very, very well known as a haiku poet nationally. And I've reprinted about 3 of his haiku. So I tried to get the best haiku that I could find and of experienced poets to reprint, so that people wouldn't be, they would get a good background on what haiku really is and how it can be written effectively.
So you thought that you wanted to provide sort of the very high caliber.
Very high caliber, right, because there's so much bad haiku floating around. If you look online, people, oh, this is my haiku, and you read it and it's not haiku. So I wanted to give people very specific and precise examples of what it's really like, so they could learn.
Yes. Well, I guess understanding, if you understand the form, then I suppose then you can take poetic license, as they call it, in terms of breaking it. But before you understand, if you don't understand it, don't try to break the rules.
And you brought up something interesting too. There are people who are writing experimental haiku that kind of deviates from the form. Haiku is very concrete. I've seen some experimental haiku that is more abstract. So people are, just like any poetic form, people will experiment with it.
Okay. Well, do you have some samples of some of the different forms that you could share with us?
Yeah, I thought that, first of all, I could read some of the haiku that I reprinted. This one is really lovely. This is by Tom Painting, who lives in Atlanta. He's a teacher in Atlanta, Georgia. It's Seaside Retreat. A sightless woman inhales the fog. And I think, I'll read it a second time. Seaside Retreat. A sightless woman inhales the fog. And what Tom has done in this poem is typical of haiku poets. You present an image. I mean, haiku poetry is imagistic poetry, so it has to have a strong image that you're going to react to, and that is going to evoke something and arouse your emotions as a reader. And Tom did that very effectively in this poem. Here's a senryu, which is a humorous haiku, because the book, after all, is Haiku and Senryu, a simple guide for all. Senryu is humorous haiku, and Robert Menon in Michigan wrote this one. First day of school, her brother's backpack with legs. And so with a senryu, I'll read it again. First day of school, her brother's backpack with legs. With a senryu that focuses on human nature haiku, it's often humorous, and I think Robert did something very effectively there with that image.
But the first one had a woman in it, and it wasn't just the beach, it was the blind woman. It's interesting that he chose sightless, not to call her blind.
Yeah. Well, I think that what he's doing there is, it's an example of synesthesia, and, where there are different, and you know this too, Lois, where you're a professor, and you can probably explain it easier than I can, where, you're dealing with, usually, inhales the fog. Well, that strikes you as being something you're attributing another sense to, what people would normally associate with fog. We normally would see the fog rather than inhale it.
Yeah.
So synesthesia is a poetic device where you attribute another sense to what exactly people are, what differently people are thinking of, So it's a very, very, it's a very good poem pointing out that the woman has developed her other senses to experience the fog because she is sightless.
Okay. Now, are there basic rules that people, I do remember from grade school my teacher telling me that it
Forget
was
what your teacher told you.
All right. All right, it's all wrong. It's all wrong.
Yeah. First of all, I think people need to remember one thing, and that is haiku is written in the present tense. And you've got to write it in the present tense because you're capturing the moment. In your haiku, you capture the moment, so it's written in present tense. And a lot of people, I've seen haiku, or what they thought was haiku, that they wrote in past tense. Second of all, as I said before, it has to be a very concrete image, or it shouldn't be abstract. People should be able to understand what the intelligent reader should be able to understand what you're trying to convey. And so the image should be very concrete. And of course, we know that most people know that with haiku, it has to be a very short poem. Now, I've seen haiku that is written in 1 to 4 lines, which is typical, but haiku can be written in even 8 lines, and there might be 1 word to a line. So,
and you can still call it a haiku?
You can still call it a haiku. Right. I think what our teachers in elementary school said to us, it has to be 3 lines, and it has to be 5 syllables in the first line, and 7 syllables in the second, and 5 syllables in the third. That's not true. Usually haiku are maybe 17 or 18 syllables total, but you don't have to have a certain number of syllables in each line.
Now, is that probably because elementary school teachers were trying to get their young students to even think about what a syllable was?
Yeah, and I think
or
that...
is it related at all to the Japanese origin?
The Japanese, actually Japanese don't count syllables at all, but what they count are onjai, and basically O-N-J-I. But basically, I think elementary school teachers thought that if you put 5 syllables in the first line and 7 syllables in the second and 5 syllables in the third line, that it was coming closer to the Japanese form than if you wrote in free form. But most poets now in the English language do not write in that 5 syllable format. They write in free form haiku. That's what's really popular in the English language. And it frees you from padding your lines to come up with the certain number of syllables, so your haiku comes out more effectively. In all the thousands of haiku I've ever written, I think there's only about 2 that adhere to the 5-7-5 traditional syllable form.
And do you have some other examples of?
Yeah, I've got quite a few. This is a very humorous Senryu. It's by John J. Dunphy, who's an Illinois haiku poet, as I said. Revival. A deacon nudges his sleeping wife. Revival. A deacon nudges his sleeping wife. And that's a very good example of haiku because there's a lot of wordplay in haiku. And that's why another reason why haiku is very poetic and it's very literary. You have a lot of wordplay in haiku. So, and here's another Senryu. The termination notice, how far it flies as an airplane. The termination notice, how far it flies as an airplane. And that was written by Leroy Gorman, who's a very well-known Canadian haiku poet. My book is really filled with a lot of haiku examples, so people really catch on to the rhythm and the style of it.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to shift now to my other guest, Lois Barr, let's see, I've got a whole bio here. My goodness, also equally impressive qualifications. Lois Barr is the author of a chapbook titled Biopoesis, which won first prize and will be published in September
Yes.
By Poetica magazine. Her poems and stories have appeared in The Examined Life, a literary journal of the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. Now that's an unusual place to publish poetry, but Journal of Modern Poetry, Flashquake, Poetica, Fatitude, East on Central, Ekekshara, the DuPage Review, and Mochila.
Mochila.
Mochila. Okay. All right. I put the emphasis on the wrong whatever. Okay. Her writing is also included in several zines as well as 4 different anthologies: Art from Art, Love After 70, Poetic Story, and Flash, an anthology. She has also received a Pushcart nominations for poetry and fiction and is a winner of the Highland Park Poetry 2014 Poetry That Moves contest. She was the May poem on buses. The contest puts poetry on Pace North Shore suburban buses operating between Evanston, Highland Park, and Waukegan. And Lois says she likes to bike, write, and paint, but not at the same time, which we're grateful for. Otherwise, you might be in a body cast. Well, your book is more like a book. I mean, it's a chapbook.
Right.
What is it? And a chapbook is?
A chapbook is a book that is spineless. It's short, and it varies. It can be as short as, mine is going to be 20 pages, but it can be as long as 30 or 40 pages. Okay. There could be a short story chapbook up to about 50 pages or so.
Okay.
So,
and typically, you know, as a writer, I think, you know, you've obviously published individual poems in multiple journals. And so the natural progression of the next step for a writer is to say, hey, I should make a book. What was your journey like?
Well, you know, when I first started writing poetry, it seemed like I started very late. I've only been doing this about 10 years. And so all your poems seem like adopted children. None of them look like each other, and so you don't feel like you have a book. But then I think we went together to the Journal of Modern Poetry, which I recommend to beginning poets and middle poets and any kind of poet because they treat you so nicely. And I read Biopoesis there, and it was a very gratifying feeling. And then a certain number of my poems seemed to have a biblical or Jewish theme. And the Poetica magazine, the chapbook prize, is Jewish-themed poetry.
Okay.
So they kind of came together, and then when I was making it, I was wicked. I cut anything that I thought really didn't fit, and I made it quite short, but just things that I really thought kind of went along and told a bit of a story, beginning with creation.
Right.
So,
well, again, when I read your collection, I thought, wow, it's the story of humanity from the Big Bang all the way to the present, as told through the lens of Jewish literature. You know, I mean, it really is. But I guess I was surprised to get the, you know, because order. I mean, the order of your poems made so much sense. So when you're reading the collection, it really does flow.
Yeah.
And to say that there's chronology, it seems a simplistic way to say, but did you have an aha moment when you came up with that? Okay.
I did. I didn't know how to put it together, and then I thought, oh, okay, so creation, so original sin, Jonah and the whale, I have a poem about Elijah the prophet, and then, you know, I kind of took a big jump into immigration, and that kind of a thing, and then my own things about my own life. But yeah, I decided chronology, and the editor wanted to change it because she wanted poems facing each other.
Oh.
The 2-page poems, and I really didn't want to change. So she was lovely. She was wonderful. She's really wonderful to work with, and it came out the way I wanted it.
Oh,
yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
And I did have a question also for you about. Oh, well, you know what? Since you mentioned Biopoesis and the Big Bang, perhaps you could read that poem for us.
Sure.
That would be great.
Okay. So I thought maybe you would ask what it means. So I looked it up in Wikipedia because I'm not a scientist and I don't even remember. But I just fell in love with the word. But biopoesis does mean the creation from the primordial mass, the goo that everything comes out of. Bio-life, poesis, the Greek for making. Okay, so this is my idea. Biopoesis, it wasn't a big bang, but a series of soft pops like champagne bubbles bursting open, or the sizzle of water on a fiery hot skillet, cells splitting, regenerating and splitting again, gurgling of bubbles, buoyant bubbles, borne on waves, warm, magnetic, repetitive, rhythmic, a sweet, soporific lullaby of creation, crashing on rocks soon enough. Banging didn't start till the age of stone. Then God woke up and paid attention.
And beautiful alliteration, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no.
Thanks.
I mean, and I guess, what took you to, I mean, what inspired this poem to begin with? I mean, it's not really the subject matter of most poetry.
I wanted it to sound the way creation must have sounded.
Okay.
And then, you know, the humor in the end that, you know, well, there's a saying in Yiddish, to hakmir chainik, to bang on a tea kettle. And so I was thinking of, you know, all the banging of the Stone Age, and then God would go, oh, stop bothering me. So that's kind of what was going on in my mind.
Well, and I guess I also like the idea, just the fact that kind of the root of poetry is also in that word. I wondered if that had been part of the appeal.
That when I saw that word, I said, oh my gosh, that's a great word. That really was the beginning of the poem. When I saw biopoesis, I said, ooh, that's a great word.
Yeah.
So I had no idea what it meant.
Well, you certainly found out. I was going to ask, how long did you work on the manuscript? I mean, you say you only started writing poetry 10 years ago or so. So in terms of when you made the commitment to assemble your manuscript.
Oh, I don't really remember, but certainly over the course of at least a month, and the poems range. Some of them I wrote quite a long time ago. The Bialystok impasse that I wrote about falling asleep in the synagogue and waking up to the rabbi talking about something. And that poem is, I think, at least 10 years old, and it was one of the first things I ever got published. And it was, yeah, so, yeah.
Well, I know there was another poem that I definitely wanted you to read, and that was Leave Some Figs.
Leave Some Figs, okay. And that, the cover of the book, which is by Virginia artist Leslie Graff. And Leave Some Figs, I wrote with my writing group. We were on the show a bit ago, and Kathy Dorman, we were at her house, and we were working on the book of Genesis. And Kathy told the story about going to somebody's house to visit, and the owner of this farm said, you know, figs don't all come at once. They come slowly, so if you go out there, leave some figs. And anyway, I won't tell you what Kathy did, but so it's for Catherine Dorman. Leave some figs. Caution was all around them, but Eve and Adam didn't notice. In their headlong rush to try everything, the grainy pear, the juice dripping from Adam's face and arms, Eve licking it and biting into his pear. But there was no his pear or her pear, just plenitude of pears. A plenary session of pears, the bees busy making honey, the buzz of their business, soporific backdrop of Adam and Eve's sugar-induced somnolence, a delicious midsummer nap as the snake slithered slowly above their heads. And the same was true of the fish, dappled waters of the river where they stood submerged to their waists and held the wriggling animals in their fists, the silver skin and crunchy scales resisting their bite, but then the flesh so sweet and juicy. And the same for the tomatoes that were hard, green, and sour, but then all red, all big, all round, all at once, so they sucked them. Only the figs came slowly, one by one, and God cautioned them to be patient. Savlanut, she said in Hebrew. Eat one fig a day. God specified. They shrugged their tawny shoulders and agreed. Why not? But one day while Adam slept, the snake crept up with a fig. Eve was used to her creeping. Sample the sweetness, sister. Her sibilant insistence tickled Eve, but she'd never eaten anything alone, and she just wasn't that hungry. Now Snake insisted, nothing on earth like a ripe fig, taste just one. And Eve did, and it was good. And she ate another, and soon she had pulled them all off the tree, and when Adam awoke, he asked, "Where are the figs?" Eve giggled and put her hand on her bulging belly. Adam put his hand there and laughed, but God was not amused. They never saw that coming.
Oh, wow. I love that poem just because even, I mean, just intellectually, it's like a whole, it's like seeing that Bible chapter in a whole new light, you know. It's very enjoyable. It makes it very immediate, and I love that poem.
Thanks.
That was
What an imagination.
Yes. Yes, and you know, and some of the foreshadowing, you know, when she puts her hand on her belly, and she's just thinking, oh, maybe a little indigestion of but we know what's coming.
Yeah.
We know. That's great. Well, let's also, you talk about how the book then makes sort of a leap ahead. Let's leap to the more contemporary poem, and I do want to hear Number Your Days.
Do you think we have time?
I think we
Okay,
do
terrific.
I'd love to.
Okay,
end with
thank
that.
you. Okay. This one's for my husband, Lou Barr. Number your days. Count the omer if you can. Remember your friends. Remember the ways they tickle your fancy. Relish in their good taste and bad. Listen to their stories with both ears and both hands open. Number your days. Write 100 things to do before you die. Rip your list to shreds. Do what you're doing now or do something new. Listen to Marriage of Figaro. Measure flour cup by cup. Sip with care. Number your days. Exprime diem, and be grateful for this rainy day that germinates seeds, or a sub-zero day that freezes microbes, numbs your face. Count the beat of a tune with the palms of your hands or the heels of your shoes. Count the grains of rice in a risotto. Count the creases on your husband's foot. Count.
Oh, wow, I love that poem.
Thank you.
That's very nice. I can understand that's a special, but I liked the, you know, it's very active and instructive, and do this, you know, we all have our bucket lists that we need to get going on, right? Well, I can't thank both of you enough for being my guests today. I'm really looking forward to our events this fall. At both of the events, books will be available for purchase.
Yes.
And I know that the authors would be happy to sign books for anybody who wants to purchase one. So those events, again, they're all the events for Highland Park Poetry are available on our website. That's www.highlandparkpoetry.org. And Charlotte's going to be, I think, September 27th.
September 27th.
And Lois is going to be October 25th, both at 8 p.m. at Madame Zuzu's, which is located at 582 Roger Williams Avenue in lovely downtown Ravinia. So I thank you so much.
Thank you.
There
Thank
also
you,
will be
Jennifer.
an
Thank
open
you,
mic,
Jennifer.
So,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
sure, yes. And, you know, in terms of, what do you like to read when you're reading poetry?
Oh, poets I like to read. Dorianne Lowe, I love her. And your favorite poet?
Oh, I like the medieval and Renaissance stuff, too.
Yeah.
Petrarca, that kind of thing.
One of my favorites is Wendy Cope. She's very funny. She's British, and uses a lot of humor, kind of like the American, Dorothy Parker.
Oh, I love Dorothy Parker.
Oh, Wendy
The
Cope.
British.
Mm.
So,
Cool.
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was fun.
Yeah.
I think